Today is Wednesday, April 10th. This is your weekly edition of Political Update here from the First Alert Desk from Atlanta News First from our Midtown Atlanta studios. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by political reporter Doug Reardon. Our show and stream this week is produced, as always, by Maria Moreau, and these are the headlines that we're following at this moment. First of all, today, Donald Trump is in Atlanta for a major fundraiser that really showcases the political divide in the Republican Party here in the state of Georgia. Last week, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee rejected an attempt by the former president and his allies to dismiss their indictments based on the First Amendment free speech protection clause. Fulton County DA Fani Willis is accused of possibly illegally recording a phone call in her prosecution of the former president and his allies. Former special prosecutor in the Trump indictment, Nathan Wade, is facing a citation attempt in Cobb County Superior Court. And finally, the Georgia Republican Party is urging its first vice chairman to resign over a very controversial arrangement. But first, Doug, as we speak right now, Donald Trump is in Atlanta holding a private fundraiser hosted by two former Georgia U.S. Senators, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. But as you reported when we first learned about this fundraiser last week, it's really telling who is not attending today's fundraiser for the 45th President of the United States in Atlanta.
Right. It's who is left off the list that is really telling the story here. So the president landed today around 11 at Hartsfield-Jackson on Trump Force One, his personal plane, and that event is a private fundraiser. It is a very small event. There will be no big rally like we're used to seeing with him. This is really just a come and collect type of event for him. And like you said, there are some high-profile Georgia names on there: Kelly Loeffler, David Perdue, two former senators. Also, the mogul Bill White, who is behind the Buckhead City Committee movement as well. So just to give you a taste of who's going to be at that event today. But again, like you said, who is not at that event is more interesting. No one from the GOP establishment here in Georgia, not the governor, not the lieutenant governor. Very few, if any, state lawmakers are going to be there. And that really just shows the rift between the establishment GOP's party here and what the president is trying to tout as the new direction for the GOP, and really has been for the last 7 or 8 years. And so, it also kind of establishes Georgia as a fundraising state. We know we're important politically, but we're also an important piece of these candidates' pocketbooks too. And so we asked a couple of people about that as the president is here today. The fact that Trump is returning just 4 weeks later shows he is serious about Georgia, and we already know that's the case for the Biden campaign. They said so in an internal campaign memo that we reported on last week. This Trump fundraiser will be next Wednesday somewhere in Atlanta. We haven't been told where yet. Among the list of hosts, former senators from Georgia, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Also Home Depot co-founders, Billy and Bernie Marcus. But political strategist Brian Robinson says what is more interesting is who isn't on that list.
Anybody who is in the current Georgia establishment isn't on there. No one who is in elected office leadership is mentioned as an honorary guest. And that shows you some of the rift that still remains from the 2022 election cycle, where President Trump came in and endorsed against Governor Kemp and other incumbent Republicans.
And Donald Trump's visit here will come just days after he asked a state appellate court to remove Fani Willis from his election indictment case here in Fulton County. In Midtown, Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.
Now, Doug, that was your report on the former president's fundraiser happening right now, today, Wednesday, as we speak. But a couple of days ago, on Monday, we had another major development that was in reaction to something that happened last week. To set all of this up, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee late last week, rejected an attempt from the former president and his remaining 13 co-defendants to have their allegations of a stolen 2020 presidential election classified as free political speech under the First Amendment. But on Monday, kind of expected this. All remaining 14 co-defendants in the case signed an appeal or filed an appeal in Fulton County Superior Court, claiming that yes, all of these allegations that were made in the aftermath of the 2020 election do indeed fall under the First Amendment. There have been a lot of developments around this over the past 72 hours or so.
Yeah, there have, and I don't think it was a surprise to us that these First Amendment grounds were kind of rejected as a defense for some of the alleged actions here that are laid out in that indictment. And so the judge obviously kind of followed our train of thought there and said, no, this does not fall within political speech. We're going to keep moving ahead with this. It was a decent attempt, and there is still one outstanding, by the way, that the former president, Donald Trump, has filed with his lawyers, arguing about his presidential immunity. Of course, he's the only one of these defendants that's going to be able to claim that, because he's the only one that has been president, but we are still waiting on that. Besides that, there really aren't any motions outstanding. I think this was significant because it was kind of a last-ditch attempt, and now it's off the table. But we also had something else interesting happen too, Tim. And if everyone thinks back to January 8th when this motion was filed by the defendant Michael Roman and his attorney Ashley Merchant, laying out this relationship that District Attorney Fani Willis had with one of her prosecutors, Nathan Wade, it really sparked this very tumultuous series of events for the DA, where she was almost removed from the case. She got up there and had to testify in a case that she is prosecuting, which is very strange. And it ended with the removal of Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade, someone that she had shared a relationship and a friendship with. So originally, these defendants had wanted the district attorney to be off the case, as well as Mr. Wade. The judge decided ultimately to keep her on the case in the caveat, I suppose, that Nathan Wade submit his resignation, which he did. The defendant said, we still want her off the case. So they have now appealed to an appellate court here in Georgia, a state court that could take up the case. They have about 30 days left to decide if they are actually going to do that. Well, the DA submitted paperwork yesterday that basically urged the appellate court not to take up this appeal. She said, nope, Judge McAfee got it right. I need to stay on this case. Mr. Wade is gone. That should quell everyone's issues here with that relationship that they shared. And she submitted that just yesterday to that appellate court, saying, please do not take up this case. This is a settled matter already.
Two of the central figures in the entire historic racketeering indictment of the former president and his co-defendants here in Atlanta and in Fulton County, Harrison Floyd and Fani Willis. You mentioned Fani Willis and Nathan Wade, who we'll talk about in just a moment, but also this week and late last week, Harrison Floyd, one of the remaining co-defendants who has not reached a plea deal with Fulton County prosecutors, is accusing the district attorney of possibly illegally recording a phone call with one of Harrison Floyd's attorneys in the state of Maryland, which, if this allegation is actually true, I don't believe anything has actually been filed by Harrison Floyd and his attorneys, but you had a conversation with Harrison Floyd on Monday.
Yeah, we did, and we talked about that phone call. So there are a couple things at play here. First of all, everyone needs to be aware that there are different contingencies in the law as to what governs the recording of conversations in different places. So in Georgia, for example, we're what's called a one-party state, where you only need the consent of one party to a conversation. So if Tim, you and I were talking on the phone, only I would need to know about that recording. In Georgia, I wouldn't have to mention it to you in order for that to be a legal recording. Well, Maryland is one of about a dozen states that is a two-party state, so you need the consent of not just two, but all of the participants of a conversation. Even if there are many participants in that conversation, you need all of their consent in order to record a call, or else you are violating the Maryland Wiretapping Act, which is what Harrison Floyd is accusing Fani Willis of doing. Now, you're right in saying that they haven't actually taken any legal action on this. Yesterday, Floyd said he hinted at some legal action maybe coming down the line with this being a part of that, but they have not filed anything officially, and we need to make sure that people understand that this is just an accusation at this point. But we did go to some experts about it and ask them, what's at play here, and maybe did the district attorney do anything wrong?
Now, also, the other central figure who is not really a figure in the case anymore, but we will mention that Nathan Wade, the former special prosecutor who had an admitted romantic relationship with DA Fani Willis, is also back in a little bit of a legal hot water. Last week, his ex-wife, Joselyn Wade, filed a contempt or citation of contempt against her former husband in Cobb County Superior Court based on him allegedly not meeting all of the requirements in their divorce proceedings. And the reason we're still kind of keeping track of this is that DA Fani Willis herself, at one point early in the couple's divorce proceedings, did bring Joselyn Wade into the conversation and kind of accused her of trying to, of subterfuge, or trying really to torpedo her case against Donald Trump. Take us through a little bit of those details.
Yeah, the DA went so far as to call it interference in the case because, if everyone remembers, we were just discussing the relationship that she shared with Mr. Wade, who is Joselyn Wade's ex-husband at this point. The divorce is really what started all this. Ashley Merchant, that attorney who filed the motion that contained these allegations, found out about this through those divorce proceedings in which Mr. Wade had actually not filled out paperwork correctly stating that he had been in a relationship throughout the proceedings with Ms. Willis. It was a big part of the testimony that we got over the course of several days while they were deciding whether or not to remove these two from the case. And so the divorce is interesting to us because it was really the catalyst for these allegations coming out in the first place way back in the beginning of January. It slowed this case up an immense amount, which of course is very helpful for defendant Donald Trump, who is potentially going to receive more presidential immunity if it can get pushed back beyond November and he wins back the White House. And so that was significant for the former president. But again, this divorce case was really the start of all this. And so we're continuing to keep an eye on it. This is very nitty-gritty family court stuff with Mr. Wade essentially not holding true to his child support allegation, his child support responsibilities. And so, again, we're keeping a close eye on it, even though he is no longer a part of this case in Fulton County.
And we're talking about allegations. What we're about to cover next are not allegations. These are actual court findings where a court in the state of Georgia has ruled that Brian Pritchard, who is the first vice chair of the Georgia Republican Party, is guilty of voting illegally 11 times while he was serving a sentence of probation for check forgery charges that were already proven in a court of law. Now Brian Pritchard, as I said, top Georgia GOP official, first vice chair, is under a lot of pressure from Georgia GOP Chairman Josh McCoon, a former state lawmaker, and others to resign his post. It's kind of yet another indication of some of the turmoil, the inner turmoil that the Georgia Republican Party is undergoing as Donald Trump is in Atlanta today.
Yeah, and I've spoken to Mr. Pritchard on the phone, and he denies any wrongdoing, at least knowingly. Now, he does admit that while he was on probation as a felon, he voted. You can't do that. If you've been convicted of a felony, if you're on probation or parole for a felony, you cannot vote in the state of Georgia. That's true in most states, in fact. But one thing I want to mention, too, is the irony behind this. Mr. Pritchard voted when he was not supposed to, and yet has made consistent and persistent claims about illegal fraud taking place during the 2020 election. And so you have to see the irony here behind this. And speaking to him on the phone, I don't think he sees this at all. Again, he's asserting that he did nothing knowingly wrong, but he was convicted in 1996 on 3 felonies and was actually present in court during 3 hearings where his bond was revoked. And so, his probation was revoked. He had tried to get off probation, and they said, no way, you need to continue staying on probation for the time that we basically sentenced you to. And so he should have known about this. Certainly that is what people in the GOP leadership are saying, is that he should have known about this. It's not so easy for the GOP to actually go ahead and just remove people. They have called for his resignation. He has refused. And so now a GOP chair, Josh McCoon, here in the state of Georgia, has actually set a hearing date for the next 30 days. I believe that was about 2 or 3 days ago. So now we're within 30 days of this hearing taking place to go ahead and remove him. They need a 2/3 party vote on the board in order to get rid of Mr. Pritchard. And certainly we are going to try and stay on top of GOP officials to see how that vote might shake out.
And that is an issue we'll continue to follow also as we wrap up this edition of Political Update here from the First Alert Desk here at Atlanta News First. On Monday, April 15th, former President Donald Trump will become the first former president to ever stand trial on criminal charges in New York. Later this week, on a future edition of Political Update here from Atlanta News First, we will be covering that issue in terms of the overall legality and the pros and cons of the case in the historic indictment in Manhattan District Court brought by DA Alvin Bragg, The People versus Donald Trump. That is coming up later this week on Political Update. Please also join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. as we continue to bring you the headlines of what is happening here in politics in Georgia, the most important political state in the United States. Thanks for watching. Tonight